In the recent State of Play presentation for The Last of Us 2, there's a bit where Ellie sneaks up on a woman playing a PlayStation Vita, interrogates her at knife point, and then stabs her in the neck when she tries to retaliate. Ellie says something like, "That was dumb," under her breath while she wipes the blood off her switchblade. The first time I saw that scene during my own playthrough of the game, I winced, and I winced again when I saw it in the State of Play. Not just because I was bummed about the loss of a fellow PS Vita appreciator, and not just because the violence was so shocking and ruthless. I mean, I'm playing Mortal Kombat 11 too, so a throat stab is kind of something I could handle. It's the way the kill was choreographed and framed to be so cold and understated that made it feel almost nauseating. The close-up, the gurgles, the way the camera lingers after the stab really made me squirm in my seat. And I thought, they're really going to devote this much gory detail to the death of a super minor character? And a big part of why it felt so uncomfortable is because it was an ice-cold move from Ellie, a character who I first knew and still kind of see in my mind as a young, relatively innocent teenager. But at this point in The Last of Us Part 2, she's obviously not the same person. She's seen a lot of shit, and I mean a lot of shit. I've also seen a lot of shit, including the lengthy gameplay portion of The Last of Us Part 2 that immediately precedes what was shown in the State of Play. It's about 2 hours in length. And even just from this small portion of the full game, it's easy to see that despite how familiar The Last of Us Part 2 is in its level structures when you compare it to the original, it's going a few extra steps to make its grisly world as believable and confronting as possible. I'm about to describe most of the chapter to you here, but don't worry, there won't be any story spoilers. All the B-roll you'll see here is probably stuff you've seen already, so it won't match up perfectly to what I saw personally. Anyway, this particular chapter of the game starts off with Ellie setting out on her own, with the goal to traverse the overgrown Seattle streets in order to reach a hospital. These kinds of in-between traveling sections will be familiar if you've played the first Last of Us. They're mostly linear sections of exploration with minimal enemy encounters, where you can focus on searching the environment, scavenging for useful materials, and learning more about those who came before you. In The Last of Us Part 2, this chapter shows off an area that's got a lot more to it than first appears. You can spend quite a bit of time exploring a number of optional spaces if you've got a keen eye. These places often blend right into the rest of the city, but are filled with supplies, environmental puzzles, enemy encounters, and side stories. It might be something as simple as searching the employees only area in a convenience store for crafting materials, or something a little more dangerous like a ritzy diner filled with a bunch of infected, but also probably a bunch of extra supplies. I mean, this is a place you can certainly skip altogether if you're not up for it. The solution here might involve steps such as finding a way outside the building by breaking glass windows, which, by the way, is one of the most satisfying actions to perform in this game, and then finding some rope, and creating your own way to swing into the room via another window. An even more time-consuming side area in this chapter involved a multi-storied residential block with its own subplot to uncover as you go from apartment to apartment, culminating in something pretty surprising, which is something I'm looking forward to talking to others about when they experience it. These slightly more involved side sections are usually more rewarding too. You might find a safe whose code you need to work out by looking at environmental clues. You might find a place to upgrade your guns, something that's also really high on the list of satisfying actions in this game. You'll find trading cards to collect, a thing that might prompt Ellie to write a personal journey entry you can read, or books that unlock a whole new skill tree for Ellie. And getting the sense that all this great stuff could so easily be missed completely once you move on really motivated me to pay extra attention to the world and keep poking around every corner. I always felt like I could be overlooking something, and that makes the world seem very full. Now, Ellie eventually finds herself swimming in the sewers, which is gross. Also, you can swim in The Last of Us Part 2. And the chapter starts to heat up by serving you a bunch of large-scale combat encounters. You arrive at an overgrown city park area and you're introduced to one of the game's enemy factions, often referred to as Scars. They're the robed figures introduced in the game's 2017 teaser trailer and then later seen in the E3 2018 gameplay reveal trailer. The group behave like hunters, methodically sweeping the area in pairs, preferring silent weapons like bows and melee objects, and they communicate with each other by whistling, which can be pretty unnerving. Getting hit by one of their arrows will result in Ellie continuing to lose health until she can find the breathing room to remove it, which means taking on Scars head-on can be a little more damaging than usual. Now, this park area you first encounter them in is covered in tall grass, allowing you plenty of opportunity to move around the area unseen and perform guerrilla strikes from behind, before quickly escaping and re-entering stealth. The following area, the entirety of which can be seen in the E3 2018 gameplay reveal trailer I mentioned, sees you encountering a large group of Scars in a more exposed urban setting. It's a multi-story car park and a section of freeway. As you've probably seen in that trailer, evasion and the use of the new ability to go prone and hide under vehicles gives you a few more strategies to consider, and it's important to note that most of these bigger combat areas allow you to move on without killing every last enemy, something that will be familiar to anyone who's played Uncharted 4. But me, I never really did that. I really enjoy how fluid, weighty, and well animated the combat is in The Last of Us Part 2. At the risk of sounding like a psychopath, the presentation of every action gives an oomph so satisfying I can't bear to leave an enemy standing as a missed opportunity, in the same way I can't leave a stone unturned during exploration. I love the act of throwing a brick at an enemy or shooting them in the leg to stun them, and then sprinting in to finish them off with a big hit. I love the satisfaction of attracting a patrol to a certain location and then landing a particularly opportune Molotov cocktail. I like going toe-to-toe with a hulking melee enemy so I can make Ellie perfectly dodge their every strike and give them a death by 1,000 switchblade cuts. And that all leads us directly into the State of Play gameplay demo, featuring the hospital combat area, Ms. PlayStation Vita, and cold violence. After these long combat encounters, the game just about had me convinced that in this universe, Ellie is way more sadistic than Joel when it comes to combat. That's thanks in part to the technology, allowing for a more realistic depiction of bodily mutilation, of course, for better or worse. It's also thanks to the fact that Ellie always has her switchblade on her, which means stealth takedowns usually involve multiple torso and head stabbings, which is a feeling that I am not a fan of imagining. And there's also something to be said about the way that Ellie haphazardly duct tapes a couple of knives to a wooden plank and then uses that to go to town on these human beings. I mean, holy crap. But the ruthless nature of combat is also amplified dramatically by the ways in which the enemies now react and speak to one another. Something that's more prominent with the soldier-like faction that guards the hospital, as opposed to the previous group of scars. Plenty of video game enemies have banter and barks, of course, but when an enemy in The Last of Us Part 2 discovers the body of someone they know and they say something to the effect of, "Oh god, Alex, no!" with genuine sounding grief and anger, I can't help but feel a little guilty. And when I shoot someone in the torso but don't quite hit the critical mark and they're like screaming and like gurgling on the floor, I can't help beating myself up a little bit for giving them a slow, painful death. It's a lot. Now, I've seen a lot of people joke about the presence of a PlayStation Vita in The Last of Us Part 2. These people obviously don't understand the joys of an OLED screen, nice clicky buttons, and like a lot of really great Japanese games. But anyway, the more important thing to note is the game the dead woman was very obviously playing on it. The game was Hotline Miami, a game that basically requires you to pull off long strings of gruesomely creative kills in a bloodthirsty rampage, and mostly lets you revel in it. If you've never played it, Hotline Miami has vivid neon colors and a thumping electronic soundtrack that helps build a haze in which you can kind of forget about everything except doing the best murders. It's hard not to wonder about this weird Easter egg and start to think about the parallels in comparison to the game at hand. The Last of Us Part 2 also requires you to pull off long strings of gruesome creative kills, but the difference here is that The Last of Us feels like it wants you to see those actions with perfect clarity. It's presented in a way for you to feel the pain of every cut, blow, and shot you give and receive, and the result is way more intense than the first game. There's definitely an excitement when you land a clutch shot with your last bullet, or get a good jump on an enemy and clobber them to death, but it still doesn't let you shy away from everything around the fringes that come with those actions. The melee combat feels really good, but it's hard not to wince when you slam a machete into a person's shoulder, or take them down with a knife to the side of the head. The damage modeling is satisfying, but there's always going to be a bit of a shock when someone's head explodes from a rifle shot, or someone's skin gets melted by a Molotov. And when the other enemy characters call out the name of the guard dog whose head you just exploded in front of them, it's really hard not to feel like a bad person. And whether this approach translates well to the rest of the game is something you'll just have to wait until June 19 to discover. I've been Ed Tran, thanks for watching.